Welcome to a discussion of the Iliad. We are in book 5 of the Iliad here today. That is, we are starting the second quatrain. Remember, in the structure of the whole epic, we have 24 books all total, and they're divided up somewhat into sets of 4. So books 1, 2, 3, 4, then books 5, 6, 7, 8, and then books 9, 10, 11, 12. Then you have books 13, 14, 15, 16, books 17, 18, 19, 20, and books 21, 22, 23, and 24, making up altogether 6 sets of 4, if my math is right anyway. And also remember that in that structural pattern, we have what is called chiasmus, that is a one side balancing with the other. And a quick check of the text will find that this chiasmus is pretty on par so far. Remember that the book 1 would then correspond with book 24, and so on and so forth, 2 with 23, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When we look at this text, we see that we're in book 5. Diomedes fights the gods. And book 5 is going to correspond in terms of the chiasmatic structure with book 20, the Olympian gods in arms. We don't want to give away too much of what's going to happen there, but just the title, you can tell there's a lot of fighting going on in book 20. And we see a sort of contrast between the Olympian gods in book 20 and all the fighting that they do, and the fighting that occurs in this book, book 5, because there's a lot of fighting in book 5. And that is going to develop into one of the major themes that we have been drawing out here, which is a sort of undermining of the gods, the pantheon of the Greek gods. Because what we'll see in book 20 is that Olympian gods fight very differently than humans do. Part of what we may say is that the Olympian gods have nothing to lose. They're immortal. They don't die. So what's up with their fighting? Because how do they win? With humans, fighting, war wins with one person getting pummeled to a pulp or killed, and with one person triumphing. Or if we wanted to be a little gentle about it, human fighting wins with one team taking the trophy and the other team going home to nurse their egos. But with gods, there's none of that, because gods are immortal. And so what is the point of their fighting? There's nothing to lose. There's no risk. There's nothing at stake with the gods. And what we see in book 5, as we'll point out here in just a minute, is we get a little taste of that in 2 of the gods that engage in fighting in this book. Now, to give a quick recap, of where we have been and where we are going to. We are reading a text which is a poet Homer. Homer was writing in the 8th century BC, at the end of the Dark Ages, it's called, 1250 to about the 8th century, which is a period of about 450 years or so, where there was very little, minimal amount of writing known to us now. And it was a period of time when there was a great deal of chaos and fighting and destruction. I have learned since that most recent archaeological evidence is pointing to us rethinking that era, rethinking the era of the sea peoples. But for all intrinsic purposes, for now, we'll say that was an era of darkness called the Dark Ages, it's called in the ancient world, or the Dark Age of the Bronze period. And Homer is writing for the Ionian coast, or he is singing for the Ionian coast in what is called an epic poem. And that's where culture begins to revivify there in the Adriatic. So the poem is set in the Mycenaean era, which is 400 years before Homer. And he is singing in the 8th century there on the Ionian coast. We've looked at themes in the work so far, the theme of menin, which is rage, like mania. You can remember that word by the word mania because they're related to each other. We've looked at themes of kleos, which is glory or fame. Hubris, which is pride. We see that especially with characters like Achilles, who's very full of himself. We've seen the concept of chiasmus, as I just mentioned a minute ago, balance. We've also seen the religious deconstruction that Homer is doing. For lack of a better word, I like to refer to it as iconoclasm. It's not quite that, because icons don't come into culture until a little bit later, and iconoclasm is the destruction of those icons, but the Greek word fits, so I use it, iconoclasm. And then the theme of metamorphosis, which is change or alteration, especially towards maturity. The image of metamorphosis being that of the butterfly when it moves from the worm to the chrysalis to the actual butterfly, flapping its wings about. We might take a moment just briefly here and talk a little bit about what epic is and what epic hero is. When we refer to an epic in the modern sense, we frequently say, oh, that's epic. Wow, that's totally epic. But that's not exactly a correct use of the term. When we talk about an epic, we are saying, first off, we're referring to a term which is a poetic term. Epic poetry is a specific type of poetry, which according to the Poetry Foundation, it says it's a long narrative poem in which a heroic protagonist engages in an action of great mythic or historical significance. So a long narrative poem in which a heroic protagonist engages in an action of great mythic or historical significance. That's a generally good term for an epic poem, because epic poems differ in terms of their structure. This is dactylic hexameter, which is a stressed on 4 or 6 beats of that. That's the structure of Homer's great work, but there are other great works that are written in different styles of poetry. So you could say that it takes the form of iambic pentameter, or it could be trochees, a series of trochees. It doesn't matter necessarily what type of poetry structure you're using, but it's normally expected that you're doing a longer poem and it's going to be something that's not a short, glib style of poetry writing. Epic poetry is normally about a great mythic or historical significance, but it isn't always. So for instance, like the Epic of the Irish, which is the Táin Bó Cúailnge, is about a cattle raid, essentially. That's not terribly mythic. It's not even really terribly historic because it happened all the time. The Táin is more about the characters involved, especially the character of Cuchulainn. Nevertheless, our definition here, a long narrative poem in which a heroic protagonist engages in an action of great mythic or historical significance, that seems to work. And we could say that, as it says here, that there are poems that fall under this category and have traditionally fallen under this category. And then there are poems that don't. Specifically here, it says a notable English epics are Beowulf, written in Old English, Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, which follows the virtuous exploits of 12 knights in the service of the mythical King Arthur, John Milton's Paradise Lost, which dramatizes Satan's fall from heaven and humankind's subsequent alienation from God in the Garden of Eden. There are other epics that we could point to, as it says here. We'll click on this. Don't necessarily have to go over all of them. Some we might question are not epics, like The Wasteland, although it's tremendous and powerful. Paradiso, maybe not as epic as all that. But the idea being that epics essentially are longer poems, poetic structures. That's the main idea. From epic poetry, we also get what's called the epic hero. And the epic hero is another character type that we should look at. This is from dictionary.com. We say that an epic hero is the main character of an epic poem that tells the story of a grand quest in which they use their extraordinary or superhuman abilities to achieve great things. In literature, a hero is simply the protagonist or main character. An epic poem, or epic, is a long narrative poem written in lofty language, usually tells the story of such a hero. Epic heroes perform deeds that you might call epic. That is impressively great, but they're called epic heroes specifically because they appear in epic poems. Two of the most enduring examples of epic heroes are ones you've probably heard of, like Achilles, the hero of the Iliad, and Odysseus, the hero of the Odyssey. Those ancient Greek epic poems are attributed to the poet Homer and are among the most influential works in Western literature. Okay, so the dictionary.com, defines the epic hero as the main character of an epic poem. Normally, they do a grand quest. and they use extraordinary or superhuman abilities to achieve great things. Now, we may question whether or not Achilles is an epic hero, but he fits the mold. And so if he does fit the mold, if you will, Homer is kind of troping that thing. Because prior to Achilles, we do get heroes that are epic heroes. They're heroes that go out and do grand things. Gilgamesh, for instance, is a great example. There are other, Marduk, for instance, who goes and defeats the great goddess, saltwater dragon goddess, Tiamat. So you have epic heroes who go and do things in other poems, and they are normally grandiose characters. Our story of Homer, the Iliad, is slightly different because, as we have seen, Achilles, although he's tremendous in battle and has remarkable what's called kleos, glory, and remarkable strength, power in battle, he's kind of a jerk, and he's kind of immature. And that's intentional on the part of Homer, because Homer is taking that hero and he's kind of turning the hero a little, troping the hero a little, so that we can see the change that goes on. The word itself of epic hero is first recorded in 1745. And the word hero is an interesting one just to touch on a little bit. We're going to go to this page here, Wikipedia, and we're going to just look at that, because the word hero is a specific Greek word. We go down a little bit, the etymology, not entomology, that's bugs. The word hero comes from the Greek heros, particularly one such as Heracles, with divine ancestry or later given divine honors. So normally hero is somebody who's descended from gods or is related to gods, has in his tree a god or a goddess. It says here that the root of the word is from Proto-Indo-European, and it's ser, it means to protect. According to Eric Partridge and Origen's Greek word heros is akin to the Latin seruare, meaning to safeguard. Partridge concludes that the basic sense of both Hera, the goddess, and hero would therefore be protector. Okay, so we're looking at a word here that goes way back, Indo-European, very early language derivation. And the word hero is normally a protector of some kind. That's an interesting thing, because sometimes heroes protect people and sometimes they don't. They are neglectful of their people. Witness Gilgamesh. So the word is used sometimes to refer to great figures that don't protect and sometimes to great figures that do. One way or the other, we could say that a hero is normally somebody who does have these superhuman powers and goes to protect other people with their superhuman powers, because with great power comes great responsibility. Am I right? Anyway, back to our subject matter. We have so far talked about the storyline, and the plot of the story up to this point is important to at least do a quick once-over. We are right now in book 5, which is Diomedes fights the gods. Prior to this, remember that we start off the epic not with the beginning of the Trojan War, but already 9 years into the Trojan War. So we're deep into the Trojan War. And Achilles has arrived late to the party. The epic begins with Agamemnon taking Achilles' girl. Achilles makes a vow that he's going to extract himself from the army, from the military, from the fight, regardless of the consequences. Agamemnon then challenges his troops to rouse them up, but the opposite happens, and he ends up having to have Odysseus go and crack someone over the back. Then we have Helen reviewing the champions, and we see what Helen is like as this sort of figure who is really an object. She's a slave almost, and leered at by all these old men on the walls. And she reviews the champions, and we see Paris and Menelaus battle one another. And that Paris is about to be killed, but then Aphrodite saves him and plops him down in his little crib, right, filled with scent. And then she sends Helen to go and get him. And Helen's like, I don't want to. And so Aphrodite's saying, let me tell you who's boss here. And we get a sense of this real terror of Aphrodite coming down on Helen. And then we have in the next book, we have Menelaus gets sniped, basically. He gets shot with an arrow, and Agamemnon's terrified that his brother's going to die because Agamemnon doesn't have anything in this world. I mean, what a terrible thing to be him. He has nobody in this world but his brother. And so the war reignites, re-erupts, and that's where we are right now in book 5 with this carnage that's about to be unleashed. Remember that we talked about certain myths as well. We talked about the myth of the wedding feast of Peleus and Thetis, the mother and father, or father and mother of Achilles, and how that led to the judgment of Paris. We talked about the story of the Atreus house, the gangster house, like the Sopranos, and how Agamemnon and Menelaus come from a cursed house. We talked about the story of Leda and the swan and how Zeus conceived of this dual set of twins of Helen and Clytemnestra and the Dioscuri, Castor and Polydeuces. And all these myths would contribute to the story of Homer's Iliad because Homer's audience would have been familiar with them. And he'd make reference to these things and his audience would say, oh, yeah, I know that myth, and immediately plug the myth into whatever character they were hearing about. So that character's actions would be influenced by the fact that they, killed their daughter in order to get the war underway, or it would be influenced by the fact that they were born of a goddess and a god, or they were born of a god and a woman, that sort of thing. We don't have access to that as easy because we don't know all these myths as well as the audience would have known them. But into book 5, the basic plot of book 5 is carnage, 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 carnage. This is a fighting chapter. And that makes sense in terms of the structure, because if you have the quatrain 1 through 4, book 5 launches off in a big way. It's like, boom, and it just starts with a big bang. It's like a Beethoven symphony starting or something, dun, 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 and you get all these people fighting each other suddenly. And that fight, as I said before, is not glorifying the carnage. The carnage in Homer, some have said, is just pyrotechnics. It's in order to keep an audience intrigued. Oh wow, look at the blood and guts. But it's not quite that, because Homer is doing something very subtle throughout his poem. He is taking the suffering and the woe, the misery of warfare that these men endure, and he is showing us how horrible it is. And at the same time he's doing that, he is showing us the contrary position of the gods and how the gods live in this sort of luxurious eternity of spirit where they bicker and yammer and cowardly and have affairs with each other. None of it has any consequence. Humans who suffer and die, things have very profound consequence. And we'll see that here in just a minute when we look at some of the scenes. Well, Diomedes goes into the fray first thing. He's the first out of the box, if you will. You open up your little Christmas box of book 5, and there's Diomedes charging in to start fighting. And Athena takes Ares out of the battle. She tells him to sit aside so that some carnage can occur. And so he does. And we immediately get a series of different scenes of the Greeks pounding the Trojans. You got Agamemnon in there, Idomeneus, Menelaus, Meriones, Meges, Eurypylus, et cetera, all killing Trojans, and some scenes of Trojans killing Greeks as well. Diomedes, though, there's a point there where he says, which side was he on? Because Diomedes is like this whirlwind of death, and he's just chopping anybody that gets in reach of his scythe, whether it's Greek or whether it's Trojan, it's hard to say sometimes. He's compared to a flood that pours down from the mountains and sweeps away all of the dams in front of it, all the dikes in front of it. And that image of him coming through the mass of men and just slaughtering everybody, quite a powerful scene, but a very dangerous one. Diomedes is he's what we would call in the North berserk, right? The berserk means to become a bear and just start roaring, hitting everything. So he's going berserk on the battlefield until he's suddenly stopped by being hit by an arrow by Pandarus. Pandarus shoots him, and I think it hits him in the shoulder. And Pandarus is like, "Yippee, I got you!" And Diomedes is like, "Crack? I don't think so." He pulls the arrow out, or has somebody pull the arrow out, and he's right back at it again. It's like this unstoppable brute, like Bane from Batman or something. Well, in comes Athena, and Athena helps out, and she says to Diomedes, don't fight the gods. Okay, be careful. I'll give you the power to see the difference between gods and men, but don't fight the gods, except for Aphrodite. When you see her, go get her. Because Remember, the Aphrodite and Athena and Hera are this way, partly because of the judgment of Paris, which occurs earlier. And we talked about that issue with the whole apple being for the fairest. Partly because you could say the powers that they represent oppose each other. I mean, there is a level of psychology here, I think, which is going on where the gods represent powers of the earth, what the Egyptians called neteru. And these neteru are powers that exist, and they can drive us around, right? We can be driven by rage or by greed or by lust. It is true. We call it, in the Christian realm, we call that sin, or we call it the temptation of the devil. But these powers in the ancient world were referred to as gods, eternal forces that are at the heart of what it means to exist. And one has to be careful, because if you get into the influence of the gods, you get driven around like a slave. And many people conceived of humans as slaves to the gods, which is why I think Homer's work here of iconoclasm is so very important, because what he's doing is he's taking the bonds of the gods over humans and he's kind of breaking them, or at least straining them. So here you have Aphrodite being opposed to Hera and Athena. Why? Athena is sort of the goddess of craftiness and wisdom and success in your enterprise, especially battle. She's a goddess of letters and twists and turns and ways of thinking about things. Hera is the goddess of the family and of the hearth, of the home. Another does the hearth. Hera is also queen goddess, ruling goddess. Aphrodite is not goddess of love, but goddess of lust and sexual desire. And frequently, concupiscence, as we call it, sexual desire for someone else in a carnal way, we could say, gets in the way of thinking clearly. It gets in the way of being successful at your enterprise, unless your enterprise is Aphrodite. It gets in the way of ruling well. It gets in the way of having a good home life. This goddess, Aphrodite, represents that overpowering thing where nothing makes sense until you get the thing. I don't need to go into graphic detail, as it's a family program. But you could say that Aphrodite is diametrically opposed to these other two goddesses. And that's why, in a way, they are at loggerheads. That's a psychological way of looking at it. Not entirely invalid, though it does have its limits. But one way or the other, she says, don't kill the gods except for Aphrodite. If you see Aphrodite, go for it, buddy. Just attack and don't let up. So we get then what's called an aristeia of Diomedes. An aristeia of Diomedes. Well, what is that? That's a Greek term used frequently by professors, literary critics, et cetera, et cetera. It's an aristeia. Well, let's look at what that is. Okay. Aristeia is, here's a good article on Aristeia. This is an Ancient World magazine. Aristeia and Philotimia, two key concepts of the ancient Greek world. I'm going to put this in the liner notes. These two important concepts of the warrior ethos at the heart of ancient Greek culture. Yeah, Greek culture was a warrior ethos. It was just like being a warrior is cool, it's manly, it's where it's at. And essentially, the idea is that aristeia is prowess in war or military virtue. Philotimia is the love of honor. Philotime, okay, philotimia. Philotimia is the love of honor. And aristeia is prowess in war or military virtue. The article goes on to flesh out a little bit about this, but that's a good way of beginning to think about what the aristeia is. Aristeia also has a literary side to it. That is, it's a specific literary term. And if we wanted to look at that, we go here to Wiktionary. A Wiktionary says that aristeia also refers to a scene in an epic poem where the hero has his finest moments in battle. So aristeia is not just the prowess in war and military virtue. It is also the moment where the hero, as we mentioned, the epic hero, has his finest moments in battle. You could trope this and make the aristeia your finest moment in college, or you could trope it and make it the character's finest moment in I don't know, the boardroom or whatever it is. So it does endure being troped to other things. Aristos means the best. And so an aristeia is that passage in literature where the character does the best thing they can. That's an aristeia. The reason we normally use it in epics is because there can be several aristei, different scenes where a character has their moment of greatness, but they aren't the main character. They have a moment where they're doing what a warrior does best, which in this case is killing other warriors. So if you have an aristeia of somebody in the epic poem, it's normally when they're killing lots of dudes. So anyway, our aristeia here, let's see, we'll go back here. Our aristeia starts off with Diomedes having this moment where he's just killing one person after another. And he finds Aeneas. And he attacks Aeneas. Aeneas's driver archer is Pandarus, and Pandarus is the guy that hit him with the arrow before. And Pandarus and Aeneas are coming at him, and Diomedes attacks them and throws a spear, and he kills Pandarus right through the forehead. And he picks up a rock and he throws it at Aeneas, and he breaks Aeneas's hip bone. It says at least it broke the tendons and really cripples him pretty badly. He's saved because his fellow Trojans rally to his cause. Now, this Aeneas, for the record, if you are reading classical mythology or trying to read classical mythology, this is the character that Virgil will pluck out of classical lit later on and make into the hero of the founder of Rome. There is a oral tradition or a long tradition prior to Virgil that Aeneas was the character that did this, but nobody had ever really fleshed out the story. So Virgil takes this character that we see here in the Iliad, and he makes this guy into the epic hero of his own national epic, the Aeneid. So you can look for that in the future. And he's a slightly different character in Virgil because it's several hundred years later. But Aphrodite comes down to try and save her son because Aeneas is essentially Aphrodite's son. And she tries to save him, but she fails. And in a nutshell, Diomedes attacks Aphrodite because he remembers Athena's words, and he attacks her. And he cuts her on the wrist, just a little tiny cut. It's not even like a big cut that would make a blood flow. It's just a small cut, tiny cut. But this causes her to drop Aeneas and howl with pain and flee to her mommy and blubber profusely in the lap of her mommy, Dione. And Dione comforts her and says, yeah, it's okay. Those mortals are terrible. I hate them all. I'll go get them. No worries. And then she cures her immediately, like that. And it's a fascinating scene. I want to look at that in a little bit more detail in a minute, but it's a fascinating scene because here's the goddess, immortal, and she gets slightly cut, bink, and immediately bursts into these wails of horror about, oh my gosh, I'm dying. Yeah, it's hardly something you say, oh, that's honorable. I should emulate that goddess, right? And the interesting thing about it is that he doesn't stop there. Homer doesn't stop there because he brings the same thing up further on. Diomedes, after stabbing Aphrodite, has a series of other kills and charges and attacks that he does. And then he finally comes across Apollo, and Apollo is trying to save Aeneas, and Diomedes charges Apollo. And Apollo barely gets away. And so he goes to Ares. He says, Ares, you need to do something. I can't believe this is going on. You get back into the fray and go attack this guy, Diomedes. And we get a series of things that happen where, Sarpedon challenges Hector. You have more carnage. You have a little scene with Odysseus. And then you have Hector jumping in and having his own little aristeia. And then you have, this is at the very end of the book, you have a repeat of the Athena thing because you have, a repeat of the Aphrodite thing because you have Ares charging in and he gets stabbed by Diomedes, who's still raging. Diomedes is still going, And basically, Diomedes stabs Ares in the gut, just rips him open, which is a more significant wound than just getting cut on the hand. But it's still the god of war, Ares. And you think, okay, this is a tough guy. This is a tough god. He's immortal. That he would just be like, oh, push my guts back in and keep on going, And he doesn't, because Diomedes stabs him, and Ares immediately is like, how dare you? And then he goes rushing to his daddy, Zeus, and he sits there blubbering and whining about what happened to him. And then, to make it even more piquant, shall we say, Zeus, who you'd expect to say, oh, it's terrible, sonny boy, that you got hit in battle. It's a terrible wound. Zeus is like, I hate you. He's like, turns to his own son and says, you're a whiner. You're a lying, two-faced dog. I hate you. And we essentially end the chapter with that. I remember I said before that we have to get a sense of Homer's style of comedy, because there are elements in this epic, which the epic is very serious in some places and very funny in others. And I think that with the gods, he's doing something very amusing indeed. So let's do a few things before we look at some specific passages in the text. The first thing we'd like to do is we'd like to look at the character of Diomedes, because Diomedes, like all the other characters, has a bulk of oral legends and myths that surrounded him as a character. He's not made up from scratch by Homer. Nothing is, really. I mean, Homer does make some things up, and he pulls things together and he tropes things. But all the characters he's using in this story and in the Odyssey existed prior to Homer and exist in other forms. And as a matter of fact, archaeologists have discovered, especially in the Oxyrhynchus dump, it's a big junkyard, a trash heap that was discovered only, I think it was in the 1960s maybe. But the Oxyrhynchus dump has produced several documents that show fragments of these myths that floated around, that were written down. And we have each character having these little fragments of stories that people would toss back and forth to one another, telling around campfires and being sung by professional bards that would tramp the roads, of ancient Greece. So by the time we get to Homer, we have a number of different myths that people would have been very familiar with. And when Homer sings, his audience listening in would have said, oh, yeah, I recognize that character. He's the guy what did the thing with the other dude. And so they would have been familiar with those stories and immediately caught into the either trope that Homer was doing, or else the consistency that he was bringing to bear into his story. So who was this character, Diomedes? Well, you'll frequently find that he's referred to as Tydides, just as you see, what's the other one? Iontes, okay? Iontes means Ajax and Ajax. The Ajantes, Ajax days. X being just an ending in Greek that's sort of a catch-all ending. We don't know what the ending was, male, female, so it's just X. So Ios, right? Iontes, two of them. But in this case, we have Diomedes, who's referred to as Tydides. What does that mean? It means that he is the son of a guy by the name of Tydeus. And he's a very interesting character to start off with, looking at who this fellow is when we're referring to Ajax. The story here is from Timeless Myths, and it's Tydeus, the story of the hero who ate brains in Greek mythology. Oh, that will tell you something right away. If Diomedes, whose name means but amongst the gods, Diomedes, amongst the gods, if Diomedes is the kind of guy who would have the guts, the gall to attack the gods, then you would suspect that his family tree would consist of people that were stronger than shrinking violets. They would be people that were larger than life people. It takes a lot to attack the gods, and some might call that the height of hubris, to attack the gods. And certainly in most stories, it's very dangerous for characters to attack the gods. So to have a character here rampaging among men, attacking Aphrodite and attacking Ares, boy, he's got to be something else. Well, here's the story of Tydeus, his father. This guy was a leader of the Argive army. He fought against the Thebans to remove the king Eteocles and to hand over the throne to Polynices, the brother of Eteocles. Tydeus was on the verge of death after fighting a guy named Melanippus. And Athena, the goddess of war, brought him medicine to try and cure him. And it was going to make him immortal. He was going to become a god, Tydeus was. But Amphiaraus gave Tydeus the brains of an opponent to eat. I'm not sure why he would do that, but he does. And Tydeus eats the brains of his opponent. That's kind of gory. The parents of Tydeus were Oeneus, a Caledonian king, and his wife Peribea. But other versions named Gorge, the daughter of Oeneus, as the mother of Tydeus. Later in the myth, Tydeus married Diepile, a princess of Argos, and the couple gave birth to Diomedes, the Argive general that we were talking about. Tydeus' uncle Agrius drove him away from Caledon for killing some of his relatives. So Tydeus early on kills some relatives and he gets driven away from Caledon. So already he's in the soup, so to speak. Depending on the version of the myth, Tydeus either murdered another uncle, his brother, or 6 of his cousins. It's unclear. You think you'd make that distinction pretty clear. Was it your uncle? Was it your brother? Or was it 6 cousins? He wanders around for a while. He finally settles in Argos. He's warmly received by King Adrastus there. He had fought his brother Eteocles before the throne of Thebes, with Eteocles emerging the victor, causing Polynices to seek refuge at Argos. And while at Argos, Polynices and Tydeus become friends. One night, Adrastus woke up to a racket coming from the lodge of Tydeus and Polynices. On reaching there, he realized that the 2 princes were engaged in a fierce brawl. And he remembered a prophecy given to him that he should marry his daughters to a lion and a bear, and a boar. Sorry, a lion and a boar. King Adrastus quickly deduced that Polynices was the lion and Tydeus the boar. Okay, so let me pause for a minute there, because that means that Tydeus is essentially, he's a boar-like. He's associated with the powers and qualities of a boar, a pig, a wild pig. He's the dad of Diomedes. That makes sense. So we go on a little bit, and he marries this girl, Diepile. That's the mother who then we have Diomedes by. King Adrastus then organizes 7 people, a large Greek army, it says, 7 great warriors, to help Polynices overthrow his brother. And we get a myth here that is referred to frequently called the 7 Against Thebes, made into a play, actually, at one point, I think by Sophocles. And certainly it's connected to the Oedipus story, which we can get into it at another series. But this 7 Against Thebes included the heroes Scapaneus, Tydeus, father of Diomedes, Hippomedon, Polynices, Amphiaraus, Parthenopaeus, and Adrastus himself. They set out on the journey with one goal in mind: to restore the Theban kingdom to Polynices. When they get to Nemea, they learn that a snake had killed the young son of the Nemean king Lycurgus. The men then chased after the serpent and killed it. After the burial of the prince of Nemea, they organized the first Nemean games in honor of the young prince. And at the games, a boxing bout was organized among the soldiers, with Tydeus emerging the overall winner. So on and so forth. When the army arrived at Cathiron, they sent Tydeus to Thebes to negotiate for the return of the throne to Polynices. Despite several attempts to gain the attention of Eteocles and his men, Tydeus was ignored. Therefore, he challenged the Theban warriors to a duel in a bid to get their attention and table his demands. The Theban warriors agreed to the duel, but each of them was defeated by Tydeus with the help of Athena, goddess of war. Tydeus sent out back to Cathiron to present his report on what he had witnessed in Cathiron, only to be ambushed by 50 Theban soldiers led by Maon and Polyphontes. This time, Tydeus killed each of them, but spared the life of Maon due to the intervention of the gods. He finally arrived at the camp of the 7 Against Thebes, narrated all he had been through at the hands of the Thebans, and it annoyed Adrastus, and they declared war against the city of Thebes. So there's this big war, okay? And it says, Amphiaraus, one of the 7 Against Thebes, hated Tydeus for convincing the Argives to attack the Thebans contrary to what he had recommended. Since he was a seer, Amphiaraus was able to discern what Athena was about to do for Tydeus. He plotted to frustrate his plans for Athena. As part of his plans, Amphiaraus attacked Melanippus and killed him. He then cut off Melanippus' head, removed the brains, and gave it to Tydeus to eat. Okay, so in the battle, in the war against Thebes, Tydeus has gotten hurt, and Athena, as it says up above, seeing her favorite Greek soldier die, deeply worried Athena, she decided to make Tydeus immortal, so she's going to make him a god. She goes to Zeus, pleads with him to give her an immortality potion, and she's going to come down with an immortality potion, but Amphiaraus, who is already angry at Tydeus, sees what's happening, because he's one of these priests who can, see into the future. And he sees what's happening, and so instead, before Athena can get there, he goes and he basically gets the brains out of Melanippus' head, because Melanippus has been killed, and he gives them to Tydeus. Tydeus obliged and ate the brains of Melanippus, much to the disgust of Athena, who had just arrived with the medicine. Gods don't like it when humans eat other humans. So, witnessing the horrible scene disturbed her, and she returned with the immortality medicine. So she's like, ew, and goes away. And that was how Tydeus eating brains cost him immortality. That imagery has always represented the elusive quest for immortality. Now, it does, but it also adds to the story of Diomedes, who is the son of Tydeus. He could have been immortal. Ares and Aphrodite could have been his brother and sister as gods, so to speak, because they all refer to each other as brother and sister. It could have happened, but it didn't. And by a stroke of unfortunate consequence or bad decision-making, Diomedes, who's the son, now is mortal, and he's a little ticked, I guess you could say. He's a little ticked, because here are the gods and goddesses rushing around, doing what they want, and getting away with it. Let me pause for just a minute and go to the text of Homer, because I want you to take a look at when he actually does attack Aphrodite. So on and so forth. Okay, so here we've gone through all these different staya, and we get to the point where Aphrodite is about to take her son, Aeneas, off the field. It said, the prince, the captain of Menenius, would have died on the spot if Zeus's daughter, Aphrodite, had not marked him quickly. His mother, Aphrodite, who bore him to King Anchises, tending cattle once. Round her beloved son, her glistening arms went streaming. And remember, this had happened earlier, right? This was in book 3, I think it was, where she comes and she takes Paris, wraps him up in a cloud, and takes him and put him in his nice little crib full of scent. Go sit there, I'll bring your girl for you. And she's about to do this for Aeneas too. And Aeneas is not Paris. Paris is, as we saw, he's the example of the incontinent man. He can't control himself. He's always, argh. But Aeneas is not that way. Aeneas is much more warlike, noble, concerned with virtue. He's much more the kind of character who fits the sort of epic hero thing. Aphrodite is trying to save him, nevertheless, because that's what she does all the time, right? So around her beloved son, her glistening arms went streaming, flinging her shining robe before him, only a fold, but it blocked the weapons hurtling toward his body. It's like, it's like bulletproof or whatever. She feared some Argive fast with chariot team might hurl bronze in his chest and rip his life out. So she's protecting Aeneas. She began to bear her dear son from the fighting. Almost very subtle here, because remember that we saw back in book 3 that for Paris to get snatched out of battle by Aphrodite is kind of a jip. We wanted to see him skewered. We wanted to see this jerk of a guy get it finally and an end to the war. And instead, he's taken off the field of battle. And even Menelaus says, doggone it, those gods. Here again, that's about to happen. And Diomedes, seeing it happen, there must be some element of those darn gods going on in his head, that it seems like a jip, like a cheat, that the gods can get away with it and just do whatever they want, whenever they want, and save whomever they want, whenever they want. That's not fair. Right? The rules of nature are such that when I got a guy under my spear, he should die. And so he goes after her, right? Capaneus' son did not forget the commands the Lord of the war cry put him under. Sthenelus checked his own racers clear of the crash of battle, lashed them tight to his chariot rails with reins, then dashed for Aeneas' glossy full-maned team and drove them out of the Trojan lines and into his. He passed them on to Diomedes, a friend in arms. He prized beyond all comrades his own age. Their minds worked as one to drive the ships. As Sthenelus, mounted behind his own chariot now, seized the glittering reins, whipped his team, his strong-hoofed horses ahead at breakneck speed, rearing, plunging to overtake his captain, Diomedes. But he, Diomedes, with his ruthless bronze, was hunting Aphrodite. Because remember, he can see the gods, which most people can't. Diomedes, knowing her for the coward goddess she is, none of the mighty gods who marshal men to battle, neither Athena nor Enyo, raider of cities, not at all. Once he caught her, stalking her through the onslaught, gallant Tydeus' offspring rushed her, lunging out, thrusting his sharp spear at her soft, limp wrist, and the brazen point went slashing through her flesh, tearing straight through the flesh immortal robes the graces themselves have made with her with their labor. He gouged her just where the wrist bone joins the palm, and immortal blood came flowing quickly from the goddess, the ichor that courses through their veins, the blessed gods. So Diomedes goes after her and gouges her in the hand, which is pretty darn bold, but he's been given the edict by Athena to do this. She's given him sort of a carte blanche, a blank check to go and hunt down Aphrodite as her mortal enemy. And it's Homer is making the connection to what happened with Paris earlier on, but he's also showing us that Aphrodite is a coward goddess. That's not very admirable. Remember this iconoclasm that he does. He is undercutting the worshipful nature of the gods and goddesses. And here is a classic example of it. He calls her, point out, a coward goddess. And then when he describes her wrist, soft and limp, she has a soft, limp wrist. Now, women, generally speaking, who have known luxury most of their lives, have soft, limp wrists. But remember, this is in a world where people are gouging each other with spears and with swords and having to contend with each other in some horrible conditions. Why is she there? You know, this it's sort of like trying to take a tea in the middle of a firefight. You know, this is almost anachronistic that this goddess would be down here. And Homer's intentionally making it anachronistic for us. He's intentionally showing us that this goddess is out of place in a world of strength and power and honor and nobility and kleos. She's not supposed to be there, which is a bit of an iconoclasm. And Diomedes goes and stabs her in the wrist. And like I said earlier, you know, a god or goddess would probably be like, you stabbed me. But no, that's not what happens to her. Homer creates a goddess who, for all intents and purposes, can't stand up to anything harsh or hard in the world, which is perfect for a goddess of lust. But it's interesting, too, then he almost makes a mockery of some theological points as well. Because in theology, people several times said, why are the gods immortal? How can they be immortal? How can they live forever? And the answer would be, well, they eat no bread, and they drink no shining wine, and they're bloodless, and that's why we call them deathless, right? There's a little bit of theology here, which is kind of humorous. It's almost like Monty Python. You know, they eat no bread, they drink no shining wine. The gods are bloodless, and that's why we call them deathless. Oh, right. You see, it's kind of like almost like a farce. And immediately, instead of saying, "Oh, I've been stabbed," she lets out a piercing shriek. Ah! So she gets this. I can't tell you how funny this. I get this limp-wristed goddess helping her son, helping, and she gets stabbed just slightly. Chink! Ah! Immediately, and she reels and drops her son. Poor Aeneas. That guy was about to get, a one-way ticket to safety, and instead he gets dropped on the battlefield by his mom, who can't handle being cut even slightly. She drops her son, and Apollo picks him up immediately and helps him out. But Diomedes shouts after her, "Daughter of Zeus, give up the war, your lust for carnage. So it's not enough that you lure defenseless women to their ruin, haunting the fighting, are you? Now I think you'll cringe at the hint of war if you get wind of battle far away. Ha ha ha." And so he mocked. And the goddess fled the front, beside herself with pain. But Iris, quick as the wind, took up her hand and led her from the fighting, racked with agony, her glowing flesh blood dark. And off to the left of battle, she discovered Ares, violent Ares, sitting there at ease, his long spear braced on a cloud bank, flanked by racing stallions. Remember, Ares earlier on was taken out by Athena, who said, "Hey, Ares, why don't you go and sit over here? Come on, we'll go and leave these humans alone and let them fight it out." And Ares is like, "Okay." And so he goes and he sits on the sidelines, waiting for something to happen. And Aphrodite comes to him, and she falls on her knees and she begs him, "Oh, dear brother, help me. Give me your horses so I can reach Olympus, the god's steep stronghold. I'm wounded. The pain's too much. A mortal spared me. That daredevil Diomedes, he'd fight Father Zeus." And her brother Ares gave her the golden bridled team. As a quick side note, it says brother and sister. You could read this one of two ways. Either like all the gods are brothers and sisters because they're all immortal, or you could say that they are actually brother and sister, because both of them are children of Zeus. Part of that problem for us is that they're also lovers. In the story, Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus, who's the crippled god, and she doesn't like him that much because he's kind of hunched over and, he's ordinary and he likes metal and stuff and he geeks out about sparks and fire. And it's so boring, But Ares is tough and strong and he's rough and he's a Chad. He's got the beard, and she's like, "Oh, Ares, you're cool." And so she goes and hangs out with Ares and holds his hand when she shouldn't. They play Parcheesi together. And for us, this is a little bit disturbing, right? But that's kind of how the ancients saw gods. Gods did this because they were beyond the bonds of humans. And so brothers and sisters frequently would get married in the godhead, in the pantheon. In Egypt, they actually did because the pharaoh was god and his sisters were goddesses. Ancient world. But we could also look at it as marriage is a very tight union or close union between powers, if you will. Remember, the gods can be seen as representing the powers, the neteru, the netters. And so you could say that lust and carnage and war or battle fury are very intimately wound up with one another. And I think that's true. If we looked at it that way, that's true, because when someone is consumed with lust, they are very quick to do violence in order to maintain that lust. If they can't control their sexual desire, they also frequently have a problem controlling their anger and rage, because they both require a certain control and guidance. And one could also say that the one lust causes people to do violence, which they might not do otherwise. And sometimes people that engage in violence almost have a, you could say, lustful desire to do it. The two were very closely associated in the human mind. The ancients recognized that they were very closely wedded to one another. So it's not too far-fetched to say that the goddess Aphrodite and the god Ares were more than simply siblings. They were powers that were united to each other in an almost conjugal relationship. Now, why she's married to Hephaestus, that's a totally different story. I think that might just be a joke. I'm not sure yet, but the fact that she's connected to Ares, and not in marriage, but in very close friendship. She likes hanging out with him and long walks on the beach with him, things like that. Anyway, she gives a shriek. She goes to her brother, and her brother gives her the reins for the horse, and she goes back up to steep Olympus and goes to her mother, and it says, "The deathless Aphrodite sank in Dione's lap, and her mother, folding her daughter in her arms, stroked her gently, whispered her name, and asked, 'Who has abused you now, dear child? Tell me. Who are the sons of heaven so unfeeling and cruel? Why, it's as if they had caught you in public doing something wrong.'" Which, again, I find it ironic because Dione is a very indulging mother, but it's also as though she recognizes that Aphrodite is, she's not a goody two-shoes. She's frequently doing things that are wrong. And it's almost like some human recognized that you were doing something wrong. And Aphrodite, who loves eternal laughter, sobbed in answer, like, I got stabbed. Look at this. It's so terrible. Humans suck. And Dione says, oh, patience, my child. We'll fix it. It's okay. Everything will be fine. She goes on about how bad the humans are and how they're going to get it. And then at the end of it, it says soothing words. And with both her hands, Dione gently wiped the ichor from Aphrodite's arm, and her wrist healed at once. Her stark pain ebbed away. It's just like she's got the stab, she's going ape over it, and Dione's like, it's okay. Sploop. And she's healed. Like there's no consequence at all. Why was she streaking in the first place? This is an almost comical scene again with Aphrodite being all to her mom, and her mom's just like, flick. And immediately Aphrodite's fine. You know. The same thing happens later with her brother, Ares. We'll skip down to that just to take a quick look at that. Ares is going around. He gets hunted by Diomedes as well. And he gets stabbed, and kind of badly too. At least, let's see if we can find it. At least badly for a human. So we have a lot of carnage before that scene. So bear with me while I skip down here. Carnage with Hector, Trojans, carnage. And finally, let's see. We'll get to, oh, how interesting. We'll get to the scene where he finally gets stabbed. He gets stabbed in the gut. And as soon as he gets stabbed in the gut, he goes back up to his dad and he starts blubbering as well. So Diomedes is urged on by goddess Athena, go get Ares, go get him. And they charge after Ares. And let's see here. Here it is. Okay. But now, wild as a black cyclone twisting out of a cloud bank, building up from the day's heat, blasts, and towers, so brazen Ares looked to Didaea's son Diomedes, soaring up with the clouds to the broad sweeping sky. He quickly gained the god's stronghold, steep Olympus, and settling down by the side of Cronos' great son Zeus, his spirit racked with pain, Ares displayed the blood, the fresh immortal blood that gushed from his wound. So you get stabbed by Diomedes, and immediately it's like this black cloud, this cyclone that goes up to heaven. It's tremendous. And Diomedes is like, oh, nuts. But he just goes back up to Olympus. He doesn't enact slaughter on Diomedes yet. And he goes up to his father, and he's like, look at my wound. Right? Aren't you incensed to see this? Your own kids getting, blah, blah, blah. He complains about Athena and how Athena does this and that. And Zeus says, who marshals the storm clouds, lowered a dark glance. And he let loose at Ares. No more you lying, two-faced. No more sidling up to me, whining here before me. You, I hate you. Most of all the Olympian gods. Always dear to your heart, strife, yes, and battles a bloody grind of war. You have your mother's uncontrollable rage. Because Zeus is always going after Hera. Incorrigible, that Hera. Say what you will, I can hardly keep her down. Hera's urgings, I trust, have made you suffer this, but I cannot bear to see you agonize so long. You are my child. To me, your mother bore you. If you had sprung from another god, believe me, and grown in such a blinding devastation, long ago you would have dropped below the Titans deep in the dark pit. Now, for us, we might say, oh, what a terrible dad Zeus is for saying such things to his son. And yeah, that would be true. But he's also, Zeus, he's an immortal. And he's the head of the immortals, the head of the Olympus, top of the food chain. And here he is saying these things to his son, who's also an immortal. And in some ways, his son deserves it because he's supposed to be this big, bad, tough guy. And the minute he gets stabbed, he goes blubbering to his dad. And Zeus says, you're terrible. You're rotten. You suck. You whine too much. You're a dog. You're your own mother's child. Unfortunately, I had to stick with you because I'm your dad, and if I weren't your dad, you'd go straight to hell. These are like some seriously harsh words that Zeus says to him. And they're kind of deserving because you'd think Ares would be stronger than that in battle. But the whole thing, the whole mess is tawdry. It's what we would call, airing your laundry in public. It's something where if you see the gods doing godlike things and being immortal and standing tall for this and that, you're like, oh, yeah, that's worshipful. It's something that I want to emulate. When you see the gods bickering with each other and whining and fleeing to their mommies and daddies, and then their mommies and daddies either being like, you're cured, mate, or I hate you, go to hell. If we see that, then it's like, I don't know if I like these gods very much. And that's okay, because you're not supposed to. That's exactly the point. The iconoclasm that's going on here is important. It's part of the theme that he's trying to develop. And we might ask finally, what happens to Diomedes? What is it with this guy? Well, this guy is, as we said, the son of a guy who ate the brains of another human. So there's that. Diomedes, yeah, he's an interesting character. And just real quick, we could look at his little life here. It says he's a son. Oh, sorry, that's not the one. He is a barbaric king of Bistonian tribe of Thrace. Oh, that's not the Diomedes we want. Okay, so the name Diomedes is connected to this Diomedes here. Diomedes of Thracia. He's a barbaric king of the Bistonian tribe of Thracia, who fed his mares on a diet of human flesh. Heracles was sent to fetch these horses as the 8th of his 12 labors. He captured the beasts alive and left them in the care of his young squire Abderus while they went off to deal with King Diomedes. He returned to discover the boy had been devoured by the mares, and in anger he fed them their master's corpse, which stilled their unnatural appetites. So that's Diomedes of Thracia. It's not the Diomedes we want, but it's interesting that that's shared by the Diomedes that we see in the Iliad. We're going to go real quick here to Wikipedia to look for Diomedes. And Diomedes, this entry says that he is godlike or cunning Diomedes in the midst of the gods. Godlike, cunning. He's the hero in the Trojan War. He was born to Tydeus and Diepele and later became king of Argos, succeeding his maternal grandfather Adrastus. After the Trojan War, he is said to have founded 10 or more Italian cities. And after his death, was worshipped as a divine being in both Italy and Greece. So he goes on from the Trojan War to really do some pretty powerful things. And yet he shares with mythology that the name of this other guy that fed humans to his horses. And in the end, when he does die, he's worshipped almost like a god. So an interesting character, and really part of Homer's attempt to create this iconoclastic thing throughout the course of his story. Diomedes appears in book after book of the Iliad. He doesn't just go away. I mean, he's even in the Wooden Horse finally when they take the city at the end, the fall of Troy. This little bit is the last intriguing thing about him. Let's see. Diomedes, Athena caused a quarrel between Agamemnon and Menelaus about the voyage from Troy. Agamemnon then stayed on to appease the anger of Athena. Diomedes and Nestor held a discussion about the situation and decided to leave immediately. They took their vast armies and left Troy, and they managed to reach home safely. But Athena called upon Poseidon to bring a violent storm upon most of the other Achaean ships. Diomedes is one of the few Achaean commanders to return home safely, arriving in Argos only 4 days after his departure from Troy. Since the other Achaeans suffered during their respective nostoi, that is, returns, nostos means return in Greek, because they committed an atrocity of some kind, Diomedes' safe nostos implies that he had the favor of the gods during his journey. That's a very interesting thing to me. Homer's audience would have known that Diomedes was one of the few to get home safely, who had the favor of the gods. And yet Diomedes is one of the few characters in the entire epic who also stabs the gods. What does one make of that? certainly iconoclastic. But is that an implication that Homer is suggesting again that maybe we are validated in challenging the gods, at least the ancient world gods? A very interesting passage. There's a lot more to plumb in this book, but for the sake of time, I think that's a good place to stop, remembering that we are talking about the development or metamorphosis of Achilles as an everyman for the development of you and I, for our own growth. And part of our own growth, Homer suggests, is that we begin to challenge those powers, those neteru that have power over us. We begin to challenge them and take them on and maybe stab them, I guess you could say, because it's the only way to break the hold of these gods that, when worshipped as gods, become demons. I thank you for your time. Next time that we meet, we'll be taking on the next book, book 6, which talks about Hector and the return to Troy, one of the crucial passages of the book. So I hope to see you next time to discuss book 5 of Homer's Iliad. Until that time, take care. God bless.